Hi everybody, it's Josh again. I'm now going to do part 3 of this day, and this was the part that Chelsea did on August 12th, and it has to do with saturate the environment. So Chelsea started just by reminding everybody that once Greg had talked about the idea of the growth mindset, that our goal in schools is to change students' mindsets. And so she talked about how she was going to be explaining the whole concept of saturating the environment, and then after that, Viviana was going to do the effective effort, and then I would do the daily interactions. So that's kind of the plan for this one. So for saturate the environment, Chelsea referred to chapter 12, where John Safier, the author of Skillful Teacher, said that expectations in a classroom can't be seen and that they, quote, hang in the air almost like an atmosphere. And so we know that the expectations that are in your class, whether you're proactive or not, they are always there. And so what we want to try to do is to control that and make sure that whatever the students feel is what we have intended for them to feel. So then Chelsea started to go into the concept of the 3 high expectation messages, and how any person is motivated when the following 3 things exist. So they think that the work is important, they think that they can do it, and that they think there's people there that won't give up on them and will help them. And so when these messages are in the air of your classroom, students are motivated to learn. And more importantly, when it's not, or when a student isn't motivated, you can sometimes kind of use these as a checklist to try to figure out why they're not motivated. Then Chelsea made a little joke about how we wanted to invent a spray, but obviously we can't do that. That will kind of mist growth mindset all over our students. So instead, we have this multi-pronged approach that we're going to need to follow. And so that starts with what she talked about were the stories that we tell. I think this is actually pretty funny because Michael Jordan, I think, probably stopped playing basketball before these kids were born, but at least for people our age, he's that story of his where he was cut from his freshman basketball team and then became the greatest basketball player ever, is a great story to tell about how you're judged your freshman year of high school can't really determine who you're going to be. Chelsea also mentioned that it's really important that kids hear stories about you and your own struggles and how you're developing a growth mindset as well. Then she also talked about visuals, and classroom visuals can be like actually posters. So this is an example of a poster that we sometimes see in in teachers' classrooms, or this one as well, that I can't yet. And so the important thing is that that she talked about with this is that it's not the one-stop story that you tell or having the poster. The I can't yet poster only works if it's reinforcing the message that you're giving in other ways. And I think she talked about the first attempt in learning. You can have that on your wall, but if you don't allow students to retake quizzes or revise essays, then it's really not the first attempt in learning. And so you have to make sure that everything is aligned behind this one. The next thing was that Chelsea talked a little bit about routines and procedures, although this was really the focus of what Charity did later in the day. But she talked a little bit about revisions and how these all have to align as well. And then finally, before she put you guys to work, she talked about other things that you can do. This was an example from a teacher at Fremont called a dendrite ticket, where he would give this ticket out, usually 1 or 2 a day, to students that were taking risks. So maybe raising their hand when they weren't sure, or trying a problem at the board and getting it wrong. And so they'd give them the ticket. It would remind them that the whole point of this is to grow a more complex thinking network inside their brains, their neural pathways. And then they would get some sort of reward. And we also think it's really interesting that a huge majority, 90% of the students, this teacher reported, want the parent phone call home. So that also allowed him to connect with parents in a really positive way as well. After that, we put you to work a little bit with pairs, and then at a table, just kind of brainstorming for yourselves what kind of ways that you can use stories and visuals, and what kind of ways you can use routines, procedures, and policies in order to saturate your environment with growth mindset and high expectations messages. After that, Chelsea did a little tiny bit on instructional strategies, although this was really the focus of what I did later in the day, and so I'm not really going to go into it too much now, but the cold calling and no opt-out and the way that we're interacting with students can definitely send these positive expectation messages. Likewise, things like wait time, sticking with a student, all of those types of things, the strategies that we use and then the way that we implement them through our daily interactions can have a huge impact. And so that's why that's kind of the third part of our three-pronged approach. After that section, we let you go back again and do a little bit more brainstorming in your groups and to try to add to your repertoire so that you could go into the school year with a bunch of ideas about how to saturate the environment. And then finally, at the end of our presentation, Chelsea talked about how we'll know whether we're successful. And in terms of the goal of changing students' mindsets, it's really simple, we think. First of all, asking them if they have a growth mindset doesn't really work because a lot of times kids will say they do, but then they act in a way that doesn't. So in some cases, you'll see it in them taking more risks, or doing a lot of revisions or other things like that. But really, this question and the way that the students answer this question is the key. Why do you succeed or fail? In the book in chapter 12, they refer to this as attribution theory or attribution retraining. It's how students attribute their success or their failure. And there's really 4 basic answers to this. And so we're going to look at those. But first, just to kind of think about why this is important, the explanations that we give ourselves for why we succeed or fail can really have positive or negative effects on our self-concept, on the expectations that we have for our own future learning and growth, the sense of power and efficacy that we have, and our motivation. And so if we can change students' mindsets, we can impact all of those things at the same time. So the way that we tell this is the first thing that students might say is ability. So they might just say, oh, I'm just good at that. That's why I succeeded. Or I'm just bad at math. That's why I failed. Another thing that they might refer to is the difficulty of the task. Oh, I only passed that quiz because it was easy. Or this teacher's super tricky and asked questions that are tricky, and that's not fair either. The third is they might just say luck, like, yeah, just happened to get lucky on that one. I guessed the right ones. The problem with all 3 of these attributions is that the locus of control for these is not with the student. It's outside. It's an external locus of control. And so we need to make sure that we're doing attribution retraining so that our students will attribute their success or their failure to the effort. And so that's kind of how we know. When you ask a student, they say, well, I focused a lot, or I worked really hard, or I spent a lot of time, or I didn't try hard enough, or I didn't use the right strategies, or any of those other things. So that's kind of the Chelsea's presentation in a nutshell. I hope you enjoyed the screencast, and I'll see you on the next one.